So, we've got Philippians 2 here, which is kind of right in the heart, in the middle of the book, of the letter, and it's actually probably one of the most kind of, theologically, it's Christology at its best in terms of what Paul says in his letters. We've had some fun with Paul's letter to Philippi. Well, I've had some fun. Apparently, it's about joy and the gospel. So you're allowed to smile and talk about Jesus. I've also suggested leading up into here that there's an unguardedness and vulnerability. There's a humanity to Paul in this letter that we sometimes can take for granted. That one of the unique gifts he brings in this letter is the idea that the gospel is above the agendas that we may put on it. That in fact the gospel may be used and churches may present the gospel and individuals may present the gospel in a manipulative way or even in a misrepresentative way. But as Paul says, he will use that gospel still for his good. What I'm excited about this particular passage, and as I shared a little bit last week, is two really kind of key aspects. One is that there is a good work that God has started in our lives. In Philippians 1 he says, "He who began a good work in you will continue until it's completed." That we're to take confidence that God is at work not only in the world but in us. And that his good purpose is actually at work. My role is to respond to the good work that is already happening. I didn't start the work, it's not my work, it's the work that Jesus has started. It is by his Spirit to my spirit. Of course, the question is, am I a part of the work he started, and do I recognise it when it's happening? The second aspect that I think is worth bringing about when we talk about this is this idea that for Paul, in this unguarded, I think, space, he shares quite clearly that he lives on a fine edge between to live as Christ, to die as gain. I don't think that is to be underestimated. I think he's lived had a bit of a rough time, and he shares that quite openly. So when I hit Philippians 2, I come to a passage that talks about what inspires and affirms and encourages Paul. What has kept probably one of the key transformers in history going. What has encouraged, what has affirmed him? What motivates him every day into hardship at times? I offer up this kind of thought from Ivan Illich, which I love. That is that Jesus offers an alternative story. That Paul offers an alternative story. That is a catalyst for significant change inside the church and inside communities. Neither revolution nor reformation can ultimately change a society. Rather, you must tell a new powerful tale, one so persuasive that it sweeps away the old myths and becomes the preferred story. One so inclusive that it gathers all the bits of our past and shines some light into the future so that we can take the next step. If you want to change a society, then you have to tell an alternative story. Paul, through the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, tells an alternative story. It's an alternative story about the way that God operates in the form of Jesus. And we see this form captured in Philippians chapter 2. How does Jesus come to us? What does Jesus offer in the mode in which he operates? Contrasting, interestingly, that on the chapter earlier, he's actually said, well, actually, you can actually share this and you can actually use it for selfish gain and for manipulation. And then on this side of the letter, he's actually saying really clearly, but there is actually a pattern and a mode that Jesus operated through that reveals who God is very clearly. But he starts with a really simple question, and I'm going to ask you a really simple question. And, we could make it like an exam, and if you pass, you can go home. Or you can come home with me and share lunch with my son who's unwell. It's a really simple question, but it's a great question. In your understanding of Jesus today, right this morning, what encourages you? In one word, could you give me a word when you think of Jesus this morning that is positive for you personally? It's a subjective question. What word would you use that's encouraging? How has he helped you? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm actually asking you the question. Could you give me a word where you would say this is a positive experience? What would you say about the characteristics of Jesus that are encouraging to you? Transformation? It's a big word, massive word, but good word. Others? Shelley? Yep. Hmm? It's a good word. Revolution. It's frightening for some. Grace. Jesus brings grace. Brother? Love. Great word. Others? What has Jesus brought that you would say is affirming or good into your life? We've got love, we've got revolution, we've got transformation. Death. Evolution. So here, if there's no other words, you're all free to go at the end of the service. You've all passed the exam because you sat here. And I want you to come back next week. See, the question is quite a profound question when you think about it. See, Paul doesn't say to the church in Philippi, he doesn't say to them, how big is your encouragement? How persuasive is your argument? How enormous is your ways of describing the person and ways of Jesus? He says really simply, and he's made this letter about the gospel, about sharing good news. He says, what encouragement have you had lately? How has God revealed in the person of Jesus been helpful to you? Some might say, in some church contexts or constructs, he's not been helpful. Maybe. But for Paul, he's saying to them really simply, if there's any encouragement, if there's any consolation, love, grace, if there's any transformation, if there's any revolution that has started, make my joy complete, being in full accord and of one mind, and go and offer it to others. Show that love and grace and peace. Show that transformation and revolution, and hand it over. It's quite simple, really. It's not how eloquent you are or how significant your story is. It's about handing what you do have away over to someone else. He does say how you should hand it over. He says, don't hand it over with selfish ambition or conceit. Don't present your understanding of transformation and revolution in a way that is conceited or ambitious. But in humility, regard others as better than yourselves. Each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. So there is actually what I call a kind of a form of displacement. I actually displace my version of what I think is best for your life, Dorothy. And I take on what I think as best I can understand is Jesus' version for my life, and I offer that as humbly as I can to you. It's not Mike Hercock's version, trained as a minister, done a little bit of family therapy, made a few mistakes, has a whole lot of ideas about Christian leadership, of life. It is as best I understand in the humility that I have, how do I love you, brother? What does that mean? And here's what it means to me. 3 things I want to share with you this morning. It means to listen to Jesus, listen to others, listen to myself. Learn from you, my brothers and sisters. Learn from God. And learn from my own story. And serve. Serve God, serve you, and hopefully somehow that is serving what God has called me to do also. Listen, learn, serve. To me, it's kind of like a pilgrimage. You know, that idea that we have in that ancient teaching of the pilgrim kind of left, I always thought usually somewhere in the UK to head to the Jerusalem somewhere. But it's a journey. It was a physical journey, but it was a transformative journey. In a physical sense, a pilgrim would go on a journey physically to arrive at a destination that was reflective of something that they wanted to resolve inside their life. A transformative journey to a sacred centre full of hardship, darkness and peril. The call to follow Jesus, I think, is a journey, it's a pilgrimage. And it starts actually recognising that it's not a particularly easy journey. If you want an easy journey, join a football club. Mind you, it was put tense last night with Western Sydney versus Sydney, but there's other things you can do. This is not an easy call. Paul and Jesus don't make it out that it's easy. So for me, before we get started, we should acknowledge that I think that this is not an instantaneous thing that's going to turn up one day. You're not going to turn up and go, look, I'm just like Jesus. And if you kind of come at it that way, then you'll probably find people distancing themselves. So the question I have is, if you're genuinely wanting to know what it is to walk in the ways of Jesus, to encourage others, to take this good news, then you're going to go on a journey of discovery, of self-discovery. And it's not going to be all that easy. It is going to be rich. It is going to be rewarding. So what do I mean? I'm trying to build some suspense. So how well do we listen? How do we find the balance between the tsunami of criticism, which can paralyse us, and the feedback that we desperately need, which will enable us to be better creators and human beings? For us to really be good listeners, clearly, we have to actually take instruction at times and know when we're going down the wrong path. But at the same time, I myself have witnessed times where I've listened to Christian leaders and then I've worked out later on it was absolute rubbish. It was unhelpful. But then at the same time, I know as a human being, if I've not got space to really listen to people I trust and love and who have earned the right to share in my life, that I will not grow up and mature. If you have any encouragement from Christ Jesus, if there's anything good that you have received, then we're encouraged to share that in humility. How do you hear that in humility? How do you hear when you're not heading in the right direction in a relationship? Who are the people in your life when you know that things are not going well that you need to listen to? Paul will go on after this passage and speak very clearly about some issues and concerns that he has. But he actually sets up the instructional side of what he has to say in this particular passage here by asking, quite simple questions, I think. Are you a good listener? Apparently, I'm quite a good talker. Am I a good listener? Oh, wrong way. I want to give you an example of what it is to try and just listen differently to somebody else. For me, I felt called to be a minister. For you, you might have felt called or be still discovering what your vocation is. Sometimes, particularly when it comes to vocation, our career, what we're supposed to do in life, there's a very goal-orientated ambition. We may finish a course, we may start a course, finish high school, and we move into the next area. And then we come at it really clearly, I think, with this goal in mind. I need to be a nurse, a doctor, whatever it is. But I'm reminded that and I'm using the idea of career as a metaphor for listening, learning and serving. That the word vocation is actually found in the verb to call. Vocation does not mean a goal that I pursue, it means a calling that I hear. So what are you called to do? Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. I must listen for the truths and values at the heart of my own identity. For me, the area that I've most missed and took me many years to understand, even training as a minister and then working in ministry for many years, was trying to work out who I was and listening to myself. I knew what the church thought I should be. I knew what my family thought I should be. I was pretty clear and had ideas about what my teachers thought I would be. I knew when I was 18 what my peers thought I should be. But the question that I struggled with was, how did I listen to myself? How did I discover for me what I needed to know? It was much about a self-discovery of listening than anything else. And it was far easier for me to say, I'm going to be a mechanic, and that's the answer to my identity, than it was to go, I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. I often say it to my son, what do you want to do when you get older? But if you'd asked me that at 27, I would have had no idea. So with some humility, I come back to this simple question, how do I listen to myself, listen to the Spirit of God around me, and then allow those things to come together in a way that doesn't, it's not about meeting other people's expectations for my life. And part of that is, I think at times, separating off and handing over the idea of what I can be and putting it aside for a period and saying, okay, what do I love? How do I learn what my passions are? How do I create space for me to grow? I tie this vocation into this particular passage as an example, because I think that in our world, very much we are driven by the idea of what's the first or second question someone's going to ask you, what do you do? And I think a great answer is, I don't know. I think it's a great answer at 15, 20, 30, 40, 60 and 80. I know what I want to be. Martin Buber says this in a tale in one of his books. He says, a Siddiq tale, one of the rabbis says this, Rabbi Zusa. When he was an old man, he said, in the coming world, they will not ask me, why were you not Moses? They will ask me, why were you not Zusa? So Rabbi Zusa, who would have studied the Torah all his life, the Old Testament all his life, the law of Moses. I will not be asked, why were you not Moses? They will ask me, why were you not Zusa? So I take that question personally. I say, at the end of my life, someone will not ask me the success of my life as being, Michael, were you Reverend such and such? Were you family therapist such and such? They will ask me whether I was the best that Michael Hercock could be. Do you get the difference in the freedom that experience that brings? I'm not here to meet your expectations. I'm here to follow the calling that God has on my life, to serve, to listen, to love. Do you understand what a wonderful freedom that brings? If I do it in humility, if I come at it because of an encouragement that has come into my life, then won't it be an empowerment for you? It's brought great freedom to me. You know, I was asked a number of years ago in my role as a minister, I'd stepped down to take over a role in establishing an Aboriginal identified organisation. And I was in there to try and basically raise some money for them. And they sat me down, and the Aboriginal elders asked me one simple question right at the beginning, which was quite alarming. They said, Mike, what is your exit plan? And I went, oh, well, what do you mean? What is your exit plan? How are you going to leave? This vulnerable community that worked with the stolen generation, men who, as children, were taken away and removed and taken to a place called Kinchela Boys Home. They had established a small grant and we were to help them try and establish some services to help the families, many across Western Sydney and through to Redfern. And the question that they asked me in the role that they'd asked me to be in was, how was I going to leave well? We recognise you've got a contribution, Mike Hercock, But we also need to know how you're going to leave, because our community needs to establish its own way of looking after itself. It needs to understand what it means to grow its own leadership. And we need you to be able to help us and then let go. The question of character and leadership, to me, found in this passage is profound. In our calling, how do we let go of our role so that others can do better? It's not just the role to make a contribution, it's also a role to walk away. Jesus comes in the world, and what does he do? He comes as a baby, he hands over his power and influence. He sneaks up on us by the way he lives his life. I mean sneak in the sense of who would have known that the Son of God would have been born this way and come through in this manner. And then as he reveals himself, just at the peak of his career, he dies. And he leaves us with this message. A humiliating death. Isn't it? And so then we read, what happens? It is God who raises up the name of Jesus, that every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. It is not Jesus who raises him up. So when I have started this calling, interestingly here at Like Heart Uniting, it's really clear. What's your exit plan? How healthy is that? It's a good thing. I'm here to love you and enjoy you, and you're kind of here to put up with me for a certain chapter, and then we go, hey, that was what we agreed. Do I feel empowered by that? Absolutely. But for me, that has taken years and years of self-discovery. Churches have not taught me well about what it is to be authentically true to the role that I have to play and then let go. I've become very good at being attached to the things that I have most influence over. I've become quite attached to the idea of the role that I can have in people's lives, whether it be as a therapist or as a minister. It does come with power, doesn't it? The power that I see Paul gives me and encourages me here in this letter is the power of authenticity and humility. He's a broken man in many senses, who's locked in a prison, writing a letter, receiving resource from a church, probably a small church, and he's saying, thank you so much for your help, because I'm hanging on by the edge, but I need to let you know this. I love you. And then he's about to say, and you need to deal with some of these issues that are going on. He's got an exit plan, hasn't he, Paul? I love this little poem. Now I become myself. It has taken time, many years and places, and I have been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces. What a wonderful thing to think that you are discovering what it is to be more yourself at 43 or 22 or 65. More authentic to who you are. Wouldn't that be a great goal for 2016? I become more myself than I've ever been. I wear less masks. I pretend less. Authenticity to me is at the very heart of the way that Jesus operates. To me, this is a pilgrimage, this is a journey that we're all on. And so as I come to a conclusion about what it is to listen, to learn and to serve, I come back to the original question, which is, where do your passions lie? What are the things that encourage you? Where are the places that you are called to be? Frederick Bruckner, the guy up there, says the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need is a great indication of what you're supposed to do with your life. Where you're happiest, but you also recognise a deep need. At the heart of this passage to me is a freedom to serve and to love because of a stripping back. It's funny to me now, because I started that journey with the Aboriginal organisation 7 years ago, and I was asked what my exit plan was, and I resigned 2 years ago from being the general manager of Kinchela Boys Home. They have a CEO and Aboriginal leadership. Their funding has been transformed, and they are quite a reasonable size, not-for-profit. I'm still involved with the uncles, and I thoroughly enjoy my relationships with the Aboriginal community. And I've learnt far more from them than they ever have from me. But I know that the empowerment and the encouragement that I gave, or that I brought and that they brought to me, came actually not because I was the knowledgeable one or because I had some kind of influence. I believe it was founded on the idea that I could listen, and as I listened, really listened, I could learn what it was to be taken as a child and the impact that that had on not only them but their own families. I could then learn from that and then be a part of what it meant to be making a contribution. And if I hadn't listened, I don't believe I would have. In fact, I think a lot of government policies are built around not listening. And then out of learning out of that, I could serve. And serving to me in those contexts was actually largely just about listening. Uncle Cecil Bowden, who's the chairperson of KBH, wouldn't look me in the eye when I first met him, and for 2 years he would come into my office and he would sit in the corner, and we would have to try and work out how he could feel confident enough to say what he needed to say about what needed to happen for the uncles. He didn't have any other relationships with white people, and I was one of the first people he'd ever really had to spend deliberately time with on a regular basis. And I'm very good at trying to create safe spaces. That's part of what I do. And I didn't know how to engage him. We had to go to a number of events together. And when he spoke, he often spoke in tears and didn't know where to end and where to start. He spoke with the Governor-General of New South Wales and various MPs at different times. And I would drive him in the car. One day he said to me as we were driving back, I shot a man that beat up my daughter. I said to him, if you keep beating up my daughter, I will shoot you. And he came round, and he was a big guy, and he said to me, what are you going to do about it? And so I shot him in the head, Redfern. Then I walked round to the police, and I said, here's what I've done, and here's the gun. I suggested to him at that point that was probably not the greatest idea. After 2 years, he shared me that story. He shared that story. It was public knowledge what happened, and Redfern community all very aware of it. He shared that story with me because he wanted me to know that he trusted me. Now, more recently, I was in Redfern, right in the heart of it, and he walked across the road so he could say hi, and we went and had a cup of tea. He received compensation from the government last year for some of the abuse that he went. It was a small amount, but it was significant to him in his old age. For me, Uncle Cecil Bowden is a picture of transformation. He still is tormented by some of the abuse that took place in his life, but I've been privileged to be a part of that. But I had to put up with, for quite a while, being the one that looked like I was the abuser, the uncomfortable one. And I share that story not because it makes to make myself look good, but because we actually need people in our lives that we just love and that they don't give any return. But we know we're called to love them. To me, that is what Philippians 2, 1-11 is about. To take that love and to practice it and to live it out because someone did it for us.